Saddle hunting for me has been a complete, and I hate even saying the word, game changer for how I like to hunt. If you've been thinking about getting into a saddle, now is the exact perfect time to do it. You have the entire spring and summer to kind of dangle in the backyard and get prepared for the upcoming season, be able to practice all your shots, getting in and out of the tree, experiment with your different climbing options that you have to lighten your load and be more mobile. If you're interested in getting hooked up and getting into a saddle, I would definitely be checking out Tethered. They have two great saddles out. One is the new Phantom saddle, which is killer, has a bunch of new comfort features that are built into it, as well as a Utila bridge to kind of help with lengthening and shortening the bridge to make sure you have the optimum comfort. And you can get the OG, as I like to refer to it, that I've been doing my hunting out of the past couple years, which is the Mantis saddle. I might also recommend the Predator platform, especially if you're transitioning from a tree stand to a saddle. It just gives you that little bit sense of familiarity that you would have with a platform under your feet that you would have that would be similar to a tree stand, and it made my transition a couple years ago really seamless from tree stand hunting to saddle hunting. So if you're interested in checking out more about saddle hunting in general, I would head over to tetherednation.com, check out all their products. They have some killer YouTube videos. You will thank me later. The first thing I do in the morning before a hunt, before a scout, or just before getting ready for work is have my morning coffee, and I'm sure most of you out there listening are the same. Make sure you're filling your mug with Skull Brew coffee, as it is the only coffee company that is both 2% for conservation certified and donates 10% of its profits to conservation organizations to help secure the future of our wild places. So head to skullbrewcoffee.com and choose between 3 killer roasts of coffee and know that you are supporting conservation with every sip. Welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 181. Today I'm joined by my buddy Tony Peterson, and we're talking public land travel hunting. So stay tuned. All right. What is going on out there, people? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you are doing well. Hope you are feeling fine on this fine day of June, whatever day you might be listening to this, or whether you're listening to it in the morning or in the afternoon. Turkey season is over. For me, you've heard me say this 100 times. It's almost over before it even starts most of the time. But it is officially over, which means now we turn our attention full tilt toward whitetails. And this past weekend, I kind of turned the page in that regard and was kind of waiting. One of the things, I always wait until after, I do a little bit of turkey hunting, but I always wait till after turkey season until I go out and really kind of do any additional, deer work, so to speak, whether it's, scouting or putting out cameras or whatever the case is, for a bunch of reasons. One, I don't, if it's Sundays in PA, of course you can't hunt. There's a handful of Sundays this year that you can, but that's oftentimes days that I'm using to get a bunch of stuff done on the weekend, prepping for the week, like putting this podcast together and stuff like that. So Saturdays is really like the day to go out and do it. And I don't want to booger up someone else's hunt. Also, don't potentially want to be mistaken for a turkey. So I just kind of stay out of the woods unless I am specifically, turkey hunting, during turkey season. So as soon as turkey season is over, it's usually kind of marks the time for me to go ahead and get back out into the timber, and if I'm going to do that, and start thinking about putting cams up and stuff like that. And that's what I did this past weekend. I only got 2 cameras out. They were 2 that I was kind of prioritizing because they were a new area. So I jumped in the kayak. That was the first maiden voyage of the kayak, and paddled into 2 different areas where I wanted to hang a camera where I think that I'm going to have some opportunity, just in, a full report, I guess the kayak trip was good. I think it was just a little over 2 miles, I think, round trip, for the first maiden voyage. So it wasn't too bad. Smooth paddle in, I think I haven't paddled in a long time. So it's one of those things where it's like, you forget how hard it is to paddle, especially whenever you got some wind, which I had a little bit of wind yesterday. So that was That was a nice slap in the face for an introduction into into kayaking in and out of places. I think what I realized is that I'm probably going to want some type of small trolling motor or something like that for certain places where I'm getting in and out, depending on how far I have to paddle. If it's a short paddle, it's not a big deal. But if there's wind and stuff like that, it's one of those things where I think, a small, trolling motor might be in order just to kind of get myself in and out without, breaking a sweat or whatever the case is, particularly if it's a long paddle in somewhere. So went out and did that yesterday. Put two cameras up. One spot I think really is a bed to food kind of play. And so I hung a camera there. The good news was we got a little bit of rain the day before, I think I went in to hang these cameras. So I was able to see tracks and kind of verify that there were, in fact, deer there. That camera setup, I'm a little less confident in than I am the second one. The reason being is that, they're on their way to food, and I can see where the trails are and stuff like that, but it's really, really thick in there, and they really could go in a couple of different ways to get to where like the primary food source is. So it's one of those cameras I'm going to probably have to go back out and check in like 3, maybe 4 weeks, definitely by mid-July, and go make sure it's actually set up where it needs to be set up. The way I'm not missing inventory. But I do think I will get deer on camera there. Just a matter of whether or not I'm in the prime spot or not. So we'll head out in about a month and check that out. Make sure I'm not that I don't have a bad setup. Jumped back in the kayak, paddled over to the second location. In both these areas I scouted this past winter and saw some good sign. But the one that I paddled into, the second one I paddled into, in the winter, I just kind of came in and I'm in the process, I think, of putting a video together with this stuff. But there were just a bunch of scrapes in this one area, like a ton, up against side cover, primary scrape area, just like classic where you'd want to hunt. And so that got me pretty excited. I did find some rubs. I found some additional scrapes that were back in the timber. But this primary scrape area was classic up against side cover, and it's I'm gonna guess it's not far from bedding, and that was my assumption whenever I got in there this past winter and kind of looked around and saw the sign that was laid down, and just kind of how not the terrain, 'cause there's not like big terrain changes, but how the habitat kind of laid out and where the transition lines were and stuff like that. So when I kayaked in this past weekend, I got in, and as soon as I got out of the water, I maybe walked 10 feet up onto dry land, and I jumped a deer that was bedded there. So that's something to kind of think about and remember as I get closer into fall. Are they going to be bedded that close to the edge then? I mean, it was really hot when I walked in on Saturday. So are they bedded close to the water because it's maybe just a little cooler? Is that going to remain? Is that summer, type of bedding that's happening right there? Or is that going to be year-round bedding? I think I got my answer when I got further in. I headed toward, I wasn't 100% sure where I was going to hang the camera, in all honesty. I knew there were two main kind of ways that they were getting into this particular area where there were all these scrapes. And, you might be thinking, well, scrapes, it's not, it's early to be hanging over scrapes and stuff like that. And I agree in most cases. But, if those scrapes are along heavily traveled areas, and this place does not have a primary food destination where it's going to be like bed to food. And so playing that game isn't going to really work in this area. And so my thinking was like, well, let's see how often they're using this, what I thought to be like the main travel, route in and out of this particular area where there were scrapes. And let's see if it's being used even during the summer, even if to a lesser degree. Let's see what the traffic looks like. Because as far as I could tell, it's probably the best spot I have to even just inventory the bucks or deer in general that are going to be in that area. So as I walked up in, I saw a scrape, and I was like, and I know deer will keep certain scrapes open and licking branches, and will use them throughout the course of the year because they don't stop communicating, after rut's over. They just do it a lot less than they do during a rut. There's not as much communication going on during the other times of the year. So I walked in and I saw like a small scrape, and I was like, that's kind of cool. I was like, I don't know that I've seen that very often, just in the areas that I hunt. And so I kind of kept walking up toward where I thought that kind of crossing was, or where the main entrance and exit of that general area was going to be. And the primary scrape area is still being tended. Now, not heavy like it would be during rut, but there were 4 scrapes that were still open and licking branches that were still getting used. which I was pretty excited about. No, when I say still open, everything in that area, I mean, this is low lying near water, so everything's greened up and tall, and there are definitive areas, and I put it on my Instagram stories where it's still down to the dirt. And in one of them, in fact, I saw a track, and so there are deer still using that. Now, to what magnitude and to what frequency, I don't know. But so what I ended up doing was I found a tree, and I hang all my Exodus trail cameras high. When I'm on public, I take a stick along with me, and I get on top of the stick, and so I'm hanging it probably 9, maybe 10 feet off the ground. And so I found a tree that was kind of perfectly positioned where I could kind of watch 2 of those licking branches. But the way it's angled is that there's basically two entrances into this particular area. There's one that's coming from like the top side of the property, and there's one coming from what I think is, if I'm remembering correctly, the east, or I'll just call it the right for purposes of this conversation. And so, it kind of pinches down into this one place. Like both those kind of entrances kind of come to one point, and that's exactly where those scrapes are sitting. And so I positioned the camera to where I could watch those licking branches, and I could also see those 2 main kind of entrance points to see what is coming in and from where they're coming and from where they're coming from. So I was pretty excited about that, because that might be one of those things. Like I'll definitely go back, because these are both, new properties or new pieces. I'll definitely go back in like a month just to check it, to make sure that the camera's positioned correctly, and am I getting inventory or not. And if I am, that is a camera that will be set it and let it, and I will not go back and check that one until I get a decent wind to maybe go in and hunt it in early-ish September. I might even stay out all of September and maybe not even go in and touch it until October hits, because I know that that's going to be, if there's licking branches being used now, it's definitely going to be in play whenever we get into October. So it would have to be the exact right kind of setup in September for me to use it. And I may just leave it alone and wait till October, when I think it'll be more prime. It might even be a candidate when I go back in there to swap out for a cell camera, because I feel like that spot is going to be pretty good, and I would like to stay out and not booger it up as much as possible. And anyone who's going to try to hunt it, like the thing is actually after I hung that camera, I jumped a second deer that was bedded just off the edge, back in like where I thought bedding cover would be, and that's where the second deer jumped. So I think all signs are pointing to good things on that particular piece of property. The other cool thing about it is that I don't think anybody, even if they wanted to go in and hunt it, could really booger it up, because it's so thick to the east and the west and even the north of it. The only way to get in and be somewhat undetected is to come in from the water. If you want to hunt it by walking in, you're going to have to hunt the extreme edges, because that's how I found the spot. I walked the entire piece, the north side of it all the way down to the water's edge, and then the eastern, and I came in through the east and all the way to the western end of it. So the only way you're going to be able to hunt that, if you're going to walk in, is you're going to have to be on the very, very outskirts of where I think the action is actually going to be. And I have a feeling like you're probably going to see a lot of young deer, maybe some does, and by and large probably going to be dark deered. I think outside of that particular bedding area is going to be really hard to hunt, because I don't have a really great sense as I sit here today as to what their bed to food pattern would be there, and where they would be going and where they'd be coming from. So I know where they're bedded, and that's kind of the ultimate, right? Is like, if you know where they're bedded, then you have a chance to kill them, because then you're not depending on them going from point A to point B and trying to understand what their point B is, and you have a general assumption of what point A the bedding would be. I definitively know now that this is where their core bedding area is, based on the sign and based on kicking deer out of there yesterday in multiple locations. So feeling pretty good about that spot, excited about that. Makes me even look forward to the season that much more. But the other part of the season, of course, is going to be me doing some traveling, as I've mentioned before. And so the trailer, the weekly trailer update, didn't get a lot done to it this week. Kind of spent this week. I'm at the point in the build where I'm having to make some decisions that are going to determine how things are going to kind of lay out. So, and there are also things I probably need to, when I install something, it needs to go in all at once and not in a couple days or whatever. So I've really kind of spent this week figuring out, what heating unit I'm going to use, order that, what, power situation I'm going to have. I know I've mentioned it's going to be solar. And so figuring out what that's going to be. So where I ultimately landed was for heat, I ended up landing on a Dickinson Marine, 9000. It's a propane heating unit that's vented. It'll be vented through the ceiling. It's used a lot in boat cabins. And from what I understand and from what I've read, it's really, kind of a top-notch heater, and will, provide a nice dry heat for for hunts. So, it's probably a little bit more power than I need for the setup that I have. But it's one of those things. It's of course, if I decide to move into something a little bigger, or do this again with a larger trailer, it's like I can take it out and move it. So that's the heating situation. I figured out how I'm going to run my propane lines and all that stuff. So all those things have been ordered and just waiting for it to come in so I can start piecing that together. And then the other critical part was really the power aspect of it. And so I've been looking at like every solar generator known to man and trying to figure out what the best route was going to be, what the best value play was going to be as far as like what I'm going to spend versus, the watts, the watt hours I'm going to get and stuff like that. And then also thinking about the recharge capacity of it. It's because I'm going to be recharging from solar whenever I'm out on these trips. What is its efficiency to take charge from solar, and, depending on how much I depleted in a day, how long is it taking me to recoup that? So where I ultimately landed was, and I'll get more into this and there'll be some videos about it, hopefully here at some point, but is a Blue Eddy. I think it's how you say it. Solar generator, 1500 watt. And the reason I went with that was because I looked at a bunch of them. I looked at like of course, the Goal Zero, that's made by Yeti. I checked those out, the 1000 watt and the 1400 watt. Some of the reviews on it were and so I wasn't super stoked on it. It seemed like it had a really long recharge time, and you had to get the pricier version to get like the charge controller that gets you a little bit more of an efficient charge coming from solar. And then there were two other there were two other ones. I can't remember the name of these two, but there were two other versions or two other brands that I looked at that were around 1000 watts. And I just felt with the Blue Eddy, like the reviews that it had, there's a few downsides to it. And, I can do this in a video, but, you're looking at like peak watt usage. So it's like, how much can it give you in short spurts without, clipping or whatever, or without tripping it? It's on the lower end of that, but I'm not using this to run power tools. I'm using it to, charge batteries and just have like some, power while I'm out, doing these travel hunts and stuff like that. So the peak, availability of power to me wasn't as important as the amount of power I would have long term. And so that's why I went with them, because I'll get 1500 watts versus 1000. And so I'm less concerned than with how efficiently I'm going to charge or how quickly I can recharge from solar, because I'll never really be depleting the entire battery. The other thing is that it comes with the charge controller as well. So it actually gives me an efficient charge. So I'm getting best of both worlds of what my specific need is, which is long-term power, because I'm not going to have power hookups a lot of times, and then an efficient charge to replace whatever I use, because I'm not going to be traveling during the time of year where I'm getting optimum sun. And things of that nature. So I'm already going to be behind the 8 ball in terms of the amount of hours of sunlight that I'll have available to recharge the system. So that happened this week. So looking forward to getting all that stuff in. As far as solar panels go, I haven't 100% kind of nailed that down, but I'm looking at the Renogy. I think that's how you say it. Probably either 100, and I think it's 175 watt panel, or 2 100 watt panels. I haven't 100% landed on that yet. So that'll be the kind of the next phase. The other cool thing that happened this week, we'll get back on the hunting tip here, is it was a good mail week this week. I got a lot of cool stuff. Was I got a chance to spend some time in the backyard in the Phantom saddle. And I'd been looking forward to, because I've talked to Greg and I've had an opportunity to kind of learn about it a little bit and talk to some buddies who have been using it. Some of the guys on the Tethered team that have been using it and stuff like that on their, who work for Tethered, and got my saddle in and had a chance to, get into a tree and play with it. And, they make killer products. And so I had no doubt whenever I was hearing how comfortable it was, and was talking to some buddies of mine that had sat in it, and some, of course, the guys that work for Tethered that are friends of mine, that I was talking to them about it, and, looking forward to getting mine to kind of get into the tree and checking it out. But the thing was, I was like, you're always a little nervous, whenever, for me at least, when there's a piece of gear that you rely on so much, and there's a new version that comes out and that you're going to use, because I've been hunting out of the Mana saddle for 2 years now, and I have that thing dialed in, to where I'm super comfortable in it now. And I'll be honest, it's like, that first year, it does take a little time to get it dialed in. Like, you gotta, especially if you're new to saddle hunting, it's like you gotta figure out, what tether height's correct. And then, with the Manus, you have a specific bridge length that it comes with, and so your tether height really does matter, because that is really where you're going to start to get your comfort and going to create the angles of your bridge and stuff like that. And so over the course of the past 2 years, and really it was like toward the end of the first year hunting out of it, I really kind of had it dialed in to where last year, man, like my comfort was like, I was good, And so the idea of switching to a different saddle gave me a little trepidation, because I was like, man, I've got this thing dialed in. Do I want to make a switch? And so I got it, hopped out into a tree this week and shot out of it for like 30, 45 minutes. Man, I'm not shitting you. It's like, it took me better part of the first season to get my comfort dialed in with my Manus. This thing is idiot proof for comfort. Like, you put it on, you hook into it, and I could really tell, because I've hunted out of mine so often, that as soon as I put it on and sat in it, I could tell that, like, yeah, it's already more comfortable. Like, there was no moving fabric around trying to get it in the right spot or anything like that. There was no, the Utila bridge is killer. I actually still use mine close to like its optimum length, or it's at its full length. The comfort channels that are on the loops, like for me, whenever I got into it, it just naturally snapped into the right comfort channel, which was going to be the most comfortable for me. Like, I moved it around to figure out like where I liked it, and it just seems to fall into the place that makes the most sense, to where it naturally should land. And it has a little bit more, I don't want to say rigidness to it, but it's cupped kind of to where it kind of just wraps around the bottom side of your legs and rear end, and it makes a natural. The thing is like, even in the Manus, it's like I was always more comfortable standing, and I'm a leaner, not a sitter, but because sitting for me was probably the least comfortable position overall. But with this, I sat down in it for a little while, and I'm as comfortable sitting as I am leaning. So I actually put on the ghillie jacket as well, and put some additional fabric on me just to kind of see how it would feel as I started putting some additional clothing on and stuff like that, and fit like a glove, and was awesome. So if you're looking at saddles for this season and you're thinking of getting into one, it's a great time to do it, that we have some time to play with it. But two, I would highly recommend you check out the Phantom, because I think if you're concerned at all about comfort, I think hands down it's going to be the way you're going to want to go. So with that, I would definitely check that out. But today we'll go ahead and get kicking into today's show. I've spent enough time here kind of giving you guys the download of my past week and what's going on in the world of the Truth from the Stand podcast, or the Truth from the Stand life, if you will. I've got a cool show for you today. My buddy Tony Peterson has joined me today. You probably know him from his Hunt for Real podcast. He has a bird dog podcast as well. He's been an outdoor writer for years across a bunch of different publications. Writes frequently for Meat Eater Inc. Right now as well. Tony's well known for being a travel hunter, DIY hunter, public land hunter, and kills good deer just about anywhere he goes, and is passionate about it. I had the opportunity to join him on his Hunt for Real podcast a few months ago. Over the winter, or right after the season closed, probably like December-ish, I think. And just really hit it off with him. Super cool guy. We're very much, have a similar mindset as to how we like to hunt, the types of things we look for in a hunt, and just how we feel and think about the outdoors in general. And so I wanted to have him on the show, because I think he always has a really good perspective of things. As a very accomplished public land, DIY, kind of out-of-state hunter, and just always enjoy his conversations with him. So I wanted to have him on. So hope you guys dig it. And as always, I want to thank you all for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I have a gentleman on who I've wanted to have on for a while. He hosts the Hunt for Real podcast, the Sporting Dog Talk podcast. He's a photographer, outdoor writer, for more than a dozen different national publications. You've either seen him, heard him, or have read him in the past, unless you're living under an outdoor rock. He is none other than my buddy, Mr. Tony Peterson. What's going on, man?
Not much, man. I appreciate you having me on here.
Yeah, man. Well, I appreciate you couple months ago, I was on your show, and it was so much fun. I figured we needed to do it again here on this shit show.
Well, we'll see what we can make of it, buddy.
Right, exactly, man. So the last time we talked, man, we were in a much different world. It was actually a normal world. So what have you been up to since, man? You a little turkey chasing, little bird hunting?
Little turkey chasing. Yeah. We just kind of wrapped up the season and, everything changed. I use turkey hunting as kind of a whitetail scouting mission a lot of times. And a lot of that went away this year. And so we ended up scraping together a pretty good season here at home. And then I had a buddy who I was talking to one day in early May, and I was like, man, I got to just go somewhere. And we started looking into South Dakota, and they didn't really have much of a lockdown there. They kept things pretty open, and our, shelter at home stuff was over. And so we went out there, and I'll tell you what, man, we went and camped on public land, and we bow hunted birds out there, had an absolute blast. And it was like a tangible weight was off your shoulders, just doing something like that, not thinking about this COVID BS and just being out in your element. And it kind of made me realize how much I missed it, and it seems intuitive. Like, of course you're going to miss that stuff, but to get out there and do it, it was just such a relief, buddy.
Yeah, no, I hear you, man. I got a little bit of chasing in here. I always say, I'm very much a novice turkey hunter. I basically use it as an excuse to go scout. And this time of year for a lot of us, as you're probably no different. The honey-do list is thick and heavy this time of year usually. So a lot of the weekends are that. And so I'll get out and chase some birds once in a while. Had a good session this year. Had a couple birds that I got to work. Didn't fill any tags. We still actually have, as you and I are talking here, we have one more. Roughly a week left. I have probably like 4 more days in the season. So I'm going to probably try to get out a morning or two before work, but you're right, man. It was, especially when I went back to the family farm, cause I typically don't hunt the family farm very often anymore. Used to hunt it a fair amount during deer season, but kind of stopped doing that just for a lot of folks back there hunting it. And I like room to roam like you do, and so, so my father-in-law is a little disappointed that I don't go back there very often anymore. So I was like, hey, why don't we start doing maybe a turkey camp or something like that? I don't mind coming back here and doing that because I'm not as obsessive about turkey hunting as I am whitetail hunting. So I can actually enjoy myself, maybe have a beer or two or whatever, I don't know. And it was just something walking through this old alfalfa field to get to this back corner where I know where the birds like to roost. That one Saturday morning, it was just like, it just felt like for a couple hours that day that none of the crazy stuff that had been going on in the world existed anymore, which was a nice reprieve,
Yeah. Dude, I'll tell you what, it's, you really notice that stuff in times like these with, all the uncertainty. And it's, I've felt it a few years, cause some of the places I go, whether I'm elk hunting or, one of the places I hunt in Nebraska, you don't get cell phone reception. Yeah. And so you've got to work to get a signal. And so, you might go sit for whitetails all day long and not have, your phone is a paperweight. Yeah. And it sounds terrible. It probably, there's probably kids out there, they're like, I wouldn't do that. But when you sit there and you don't have that option, I love it more and more now to just be able to check out.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a requirement. Had a nice 4-day weekend over the Memorial Day holiday. And there was one day, I forget what I was even doing the one day, but there was one day where I literally put my phone down and walked away from it for like hours. And it was just like, and I was thinking to myself at the time, I was like, man, this is what it was like whenever I was growing up. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, if you called somebody, it was like you called their house phone. If they weren't home, you didn't talk to them. If you were out traveling around or whatever, you called them from a payphone,
Yep.
And just being so connected anymore. It's like, it's a blessing and it's a curse. The blessing part of it is being able to work remote so I can take a trip to go hunt somewhere and catch a hunt in the morning, work during the day, get out for the evening or whatever, which is nice. But I wonder sometimes if I don't pay for it tenfold by being connected all the times that I'm not out utilizing it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think, I've been thinking about this lately, because I always try to think, okay, like what's the real positives, and being able to scout online is huge. I mean, right. It's so huge and so beneficial, hey, can I get a license here? You can Google it and 5 seconds later you have an answer. And I almost am wondering, like, do we have too much information about this stuff now? Like, are people, like they'll ask me about planning trips and they've already done so much research. I feel like they're kind of forgetting, like, you just kind of got to get out in the woods and walk around sometimes. Like there's another part to this that's, it's kind of like what trail cameras did to us as far as scouting. Like, it got really easy not to do boots on the ground scouting because you could hang a camera, but we all know you need it all.
Yeah.
And so I just wonder if there's like almost too much of a reliance on some of this stuff now, and we're kind of forgetting the basics.
No, I would 100% agree with you, man. Like, I feel like I even felt myself starting to rely on it too much. And I
Mhm.
made a kind of change last year, where I would rely on it to kind of get a very high level view of things. There's certain guys, like a Dan Enfault, for example. Like, he's really, really good with topo, to where like he can look at something, and he's been hunting buck bedding for so long, he can say, on this piece I've never been into, these are the 5 points I'm going to go check for buck bedding. And if they're not there, I'm going to move on to the next. Right. Like,
Mhm.
I'm not that slick at it. So I kind of have to look at it and kind of study it a little bit. But then it's always, I try to put it away and then just kind of go out and seek and see what
Yep.
I'm going to find. Right. Because I feel like you're right. I feel like we're getting them further and further away from like the real. I think hunting, there's a couple parts. I think there's one, like there's the chase part of it, which we all love. I think there's the other part of like just like getting lost a little bit and kind of reconnecting with your primal inner self. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And you can't do that whenever you're staring at a man-made computer screen, you know?
Yep.
And so for me, it's like going out and finding new places and just kind of exploring and see what's over the next hump. For me, is as important as what I'm looking at whenever I'm using, Onyx or Google Maps, or, whatever the case is. I think we often use it as a crutch too. It oftentimes, I see people making decisions in a way that where it's like they don't want to go do that thing. And so they'll look at the map and be like, well, the map tells me that it's probably not worth checking that out. You know what I mean? So now I'm
Yep.
not going to go do it,
Yep.
versus, it almost kind of gives you an excuse a little bit. To where it's like, I've started trying to talk to guys. I had a couple guys on the podcast, more talking about like ground hunting. Cause to me, that is partially a lost art too, is hunting from the ground with a
Mhm.
bow. It's something I want to do a lot more of this year. And then the other part is tracking. I had a guy on who's like, that's the only way he hunts, is tracking. And I've
Yep.
played around with it when I was a kid and stuff like that. Like, I've not done it seriously in years. And not
Mhm.
that I could do it with any type of precision necessarily, but I think getting back to those things, and like in that approach, it forces you to get out of the the macro or the micro view, I guess, and look more at the
Mhm.
macro view, because you're trying to pick up all the nuance. And that's what that kind of approach is kind of about. And that's what I appreciate about it. So I'm curious to think, man, do you think kind of the same thing, like getting back to that, like scouting, tracking, picking up the nuances, like needs to be more important or more focused?
I do. I mean, it's always interesting to me. You bring up Infault and his buck betting thing, and listen, look, I'm not taking anything away from him. The guy's done incredible stuff, but I always look at that kind of like, that's how I hunt.
Mm-hmm.
This is my thing, and it's what I do, and that's like, it's just not my nature. And so I always look at that and I go, man, I can't. It's almost unrelatable to me to be so reliant on one strategy. And there are a lot of people out there where that like works for them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not my thing. And so I'm always like, yeah, you should probably mess around tracking. Like, you should
Right.
sit on the ground in some spots. You should get in trees, in a saddle, and in a tree stand. And you should do all this stuff. And we started this talking about turkey hunting. And I'll tell you what I see in the whitetail world right now. It's kind of interesting, is you see these people, a lot of people who are just, I'm just whitetails. That's what I do. That's what I scout. That's what I hunt. And, I have no time for anything else. And I keep thinking about all these places I find and these things I learn when I'm like grouse hunting with my
Mm-hmm.
dog, or I'm pheasant hunting, or I'm turkey hunting someplace. And I just go, man, I don't know if a lot of people have that like single-minded kind of Terminator focus just to get out there and scout and scout and scout and scout. And I probably don't, which is why I like to get out and do a lot of different stuff. And I'm telling you, like, it really benefits me to go woodcock hunt some random public land, not every time,
Right.
but it's an excuse to burn a lot of miles and get into new places that I wouldn't just go into to scout deer, if that makes sense. So I'm kind of like a generalist in that sense. Like, I like the idea of embracing a whole bunch of different styles and tactics, and just trying to be a little bit more well-rounded if you can get away with it.
Right. No, I feel like I'll say as I've gotten older, and maybe as I've experienced more and seen, different things or whatever, this year I've really kind of dedicated to what I've kind of referred to. I'm a big football guy too, right? And so like my favorite defenses are like 3-4 defenses, because you can run them in they're so multiple just based on like your formation and like the personnel packages you can use. Right. And so I kind of look at deer hunting for me in a similar way where I'm like, you know, the way for me to be as successful as I want to be is I have to be able to be multiple and be able to adapt and be successful, or at least give myself a sporting chance no matter what the setup calls for. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that's walking into a swamp where there's not a tree to be in, and know that like, this is where I need to be. I need to hunt it from the ground and be able to go, I'm confident enough to set up, on the ground here and play the wind correctly. And my approach, my access was right, and be able to give myself an opportunity, right?
Yep.
Just as much as being able to walk into a place and saying, hey, that's the right tree I need to be in, because I'm going to have a 15-yard shot right to here. Right.
Yep.
And it's all those things that like, water access, another big thing I was working on this year. Like I'm focusing on like water access and ground hunting, because I know water access is a nice barrier for folks and they won't cross it if they can avoid it. Right. And so that's a place where I can probably go and get some, undisturbed public land to hunt. And so it's just all those things I'm trying to kind of wrap into just to become a better hunter. But you're right, man. It's, turkey hunting. I love getting out and doing it just because I enjoy the springtime. I do enjoy going out and goose hunting, duck hunting. And those are opportunities where I go and I see different things. And I also meet new people, and then I start getting intel from them about other places I haven't thought about.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so it's like, I might be sitting in a goose blind with someone one day and we're talking about deer hunting. I'm like, oh, where do you hunt? He's like, oh, I hunt this piece of public over here. And I'd be like, well, I've not looked at that yet. And he's like, oh man, there were a couple really big, there's nobody over there. And I'm like, ding, ding, ding. You know what I mean? Yep. So then, that winter, it's like, I'm headed over there, checking it out.
Yep. Yeah, dude, upland hunting, waterfall hunting too, but upland hunting it takes you to places you're not supposed to deer hunt where deer live, if that makes sense. You just get, we hit it pretty hard in the late season, and we jump so many good bucks on public land, and you just go, these dudes are here because it was just gun season a little bit ago, and they're hiding out, and they have these places, and there's, a lot of times there aren't a ton of good setups there, but there might be like a lone cottonwood or a little tree line or something. There's something you could make happen on these deer, and they're there because nobody's trying.
Right. And
it just opens your eyes to this whole other world of, especially when you're talking about public land hunting, because it's, as long as you have a bunch of land, you go out there, if you're out there a lot, and it can just really open up some opportunities for you.
Yeah. It's, I started kind of really thinking about, hunt from the ground and stuff like that. I was watching the guys from Whitetail Adrenaline, and they're crazy ground and pound, super aggressive. And I was just watching them whenever they were hunting in Kansas, and Kansas is on my list probably next year. I'm going to try to get out to Kansas. And I was like, if I don't start to put ground hunting into my repertoire in a serious kind of way, I was like, I'm going to be real limited when I start to head out towards Plain States. I was like, I'm going to probably kick myself in the rear end for traveling that far, buying that tag, and then being limited to only being comfortable getting into a tree. And so that was really what started making me make the change. And then once I started thinking about it as I was doing my winter scouting or turkey hunting this year, and I'm walking through areas, I'm going, man, there's a great ground setup. Like, oh man, there's a ton of deer sign here. Where would anyone get into a tree? Well, they can't. Man, that's a great ground setup. Especially a lot of the swamps and stuff, the edges of the swamps. That I got one spot, man, where like the reeds are just completely beaten down. There's two huge rocks that it's the only way in and out. Like they got to come through there, and there is not a single tree big enough to climb to get into of any contraption. And but you could perch up on that rock up against like the little trees that are there in a ghillie jacket and just blend right in and wait for them to come to that little pinch point. And so that's what really made me start thinking about, especially in PA with like as much pressure as you get here, like you got to look for those little out of the way spots.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as when you start seeing the world that way, because I've killed, probably like a third of the bucks I've killed on public land I've killed off the ground, and it's just all about, if you find that spot that needs to be hunted, you're not saying, well, I can't get into a tree, so it's not huntable. Right. It's like the limitation. It's why climbing stands have kind of all fallen out of favor. You had to find a tree that worked for it, and there are applications for them, but you found yourself hunting trees and not hunting deer. And you get into a spot and go, in like what you talked about there. I see this a lot in the Plain States with water holes, where there's no trees to hang a stand in, but there might be some cedars on the ground or something like that. And it might be really limited, but it's also a situation where they're probably not getting hunted there by anyone else. And so you feel kind of stupid. Like I've killed some big bucks on public land, like hiding behind big trees, like too big to hang stands in, or just hiding. Like you feel like a kid playing tag or something. It's dumb, but it can work, you know, and you pop up on your knees and shoot, or you pop around the tree trunk. And so just opening yourself up to those possibilities, you know, like, yeah, you're going to get busted some, but you're going to be hunting where the deer are.
Right. And I think that's the most important thing there is like too many people, you know, and we talked about this a little bit the last time we spoke, because they make a plan pre-season and then they try to go out, or, you know, in the off season, whatever we want to call it. And then they spend their entire fall trying to execute that plan when the deer aren't where they're hunting, you know, and it's like, you can plan as much as you want to plan, but you got a failing plan at that point. I'm curious, man, I want to talk to you a little bit about ground hunting. So how do you, I guess, walk me through your approach? You know what I mean? Like, how are you, like, are you usually going into like a, for lack of a better way to put it, like, you know, a destination spot, like maybe you have a place in mind that you're familiar with, you know, and so you kind of know how you need to approach it. Like, talk to me a little bit about your access. 'Cause I'm kind of like, I've heard different approaches. Like one is like, you know, yeah, you're very mindful of the wind, like you would be anytime approaching like a quote unquote tree location. Right. And then I've also had guys that I've talked to that are maybe a little more on the aggressive side that were like, look, I don't even worry about the wind until I see one. And then at that point, 300-ish yards is when I'll start to cut the wind then to try to make my move, you know, to get close enough to try to get an opportunity, whether they're bedded and they're going to come to me, or whether I need to close the distance before dark or whatever. So what's your approach to access and hunting on the ground?
Well, you know, what you're talking about there is kind of two different scenarios. You know, if you're talking about seeing one and getting after it, you know, I mean, that's such a fluid situation. But if you're talking about going in, I mean, this is one of the main benefits of hunting on the ground. You might find more options for the wind. You know, so let's say you go into that pond in a plain state and you want to hunt it because it's just bang and there's CRP by it, but there's only 3 stands, you know, or 3 stand trees available. Like you're just limited. Like, is the wind good or not?
Right.
Or, you know, if you can dive into a clump of cedars somewhere, you can adjust your setup a lot better for the wind and where the most likely approach is. And I've seen it happen a lot. It's kind of like turkey hunting, bow hunting turkeys, where if you're using good decoys and you have a good setup and your blinds brushed in, those birds, they'll come out and they'll seem cagey, but the ones that are going to commit, you'll kind of see them like it's coming. You see those birds like stop, check it out a little bit, and then they just commit. And then, you know, it's just a matter of timing my draw. And it's the same thing with whitetails when they approach certain things like a water hole, or if they're on a trail going somewhere in like a staging area, they're either coming in and they're going to commit, and you can just hide and wait for the perfect opportunity to make the whole thing happen at once, or they're going to walk past you if you're set up right, and they're already looking beyond. You know, it's the same thing you do with tree stands, and they don't get you as much as you'd think. You know, they might bust you drawing or something, but if they're already in range and they bust you drawing, it really doesn't matter usually. You know, you can just put the pin on them and kill them. You know, and a lot of people freak out in that situation because they don't have enough experience, but I don't really care that much about. I tried not to get busted drawing, but I don't really care that much because they're usually, you know, unless they're pretty far away or something, they're not going to get out of the way of it.
Right.
And especially if you're on the ground, you don't have to think about the shot angle, you know, the up and down angle anyway.
Right.
And so there are a lot of cool kind of unique opportunities that aren't bound to that elevated saddle or stand, you know, the restrictions there. And so I use it a lot, and I'll tell you what I use it a lot for is just observation too. You know, if I'm, especially when you're talking the plain state stuff, but I'll even use it in the big woods in northern Wisconsin. If, you know, there's a ridge line or something I kind of want to watch, and I'll be able to see down into a creek bottom or something like that, just to kind of fine tune where you want to be.
Right. Yeah. I think that's, you know, one of those things where something I need to get better at, which is kind of still hunting my way to wherever I'm going to end up. Right. Because, and it's being, you know, and that just goes back to being multiple. It's like trying to refine my approach to where my approach also entails hunting, not just getting to where I'm going. Right. Because I think that's another, you know, kind of pitfall a lot of bow hunters have, is, you know, especially if they're doing all their work in the off season and they know where they want to go hunt in the fall. It's like they're going from truck, you know, to where they plan to hunt. You know what I mean? It's just like, and nothing in between, right?
Yep.
And then what you see is guys that like get it done with frequency. It's like, well, that might be where they start. But like if they're headed through and they all of a sudden pick up on hot sign, it's like, well, where's this going to take me? Then they're
Yep.
off kind of going. And so like the hunt literally starts from the moment they shut their truck door,
Mm-hmm.
and that's something like I have to, and I know this, but it's like something I have to train myself to like think about whenever I'm walking through the timber. And I just,
Yep.
because I'm like, well, I want to go check this spot out. And sometimes I will put the blinders on and just try to get there, and then I'll start my hunt. Right.
Yep.
As opposed to hunting my way in. But, man, using decoys turkey hunting, right, makes sense. I've used those in the past. This year, I'm planning to use a deer decoy, especially in ground setups. Like, so talk to me a little bit about your experience with those. Like, how are you setting those up? Do you find like the 3D ones are like the better versions, or like the heads up versions that are like more 2-dimensional, but lightweight and kind of like easy to move around? Like, what's your preference and how do you deploy them?
Man, I am not a big deer decoy guy. Mostly because, the full body decoy thing, that's just tough to do on public land.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little bit more dangerous, but B, just going mobile, carrying one of those things around sucks.
Yeah.
And I've tried it. And, so that's kind of like when you see somebody using full body or 2 full body decoys, they're probably not hunting,
right.
They're probably not doing a hang and hunt type thing like we are.
Right.
The thing that I've had the best luck with, and I've actually killed some bucks on public land with it, is, like a Montana decoy, 2-dimensional feeding doe decoy. I've never had as much luck with any kind of decoy with a head up has not worked that well for me. And it take this with a grain of salt because I don't use them a ton, but I have used the feeding deer decoys and had really good luck with them because they can't, they see it. It's kind of a small decoy and it looks relaxed, especially if you put a little teaser tail or something on there. And it allows, the does will see it. They'll kind of get a little wigged out, but they usually accept it. And a lot of times they'll actually feed over to it. But if you see a buck, you can call to him. He doesn't know there's not a buck there. He just sees this little deer that looks relaxed. And so, and you can get away with carrying when they're like 2.5 pounds.
Right.
And so I killed a buck in Nebraska one time. I'd found this spot. I didn't think you could set up in these pine trees that they were going through. There's kind of a cedar, CRP type ridge top there that led down to a creek bottom. And so I was watching these deer cruise and I was just trying to blind call them over. I'd see them and I didn't have a decoy out and they just weren't committing because they usually either had does with them or it was just, it just wasn't right. It was too far or something. And so I took a decoy and it was, I thought, at least if I see another buck cruise through, I can call to them and they'll see a deer here. And the first time it happened, I watched this nice 8-pointer go through there and I grunted at him a couple times and he came over and started raking sumacs the whole way. And he was cautious. Like he's like, I don't know what that deer has on its head, but it doesn't look very big and it's calling to me. And he came into range and I shot him. And I was like, man, I'm a mile deep on public. I carried a stand up here and I got away with carrying a decoy. And I felt in that situation, it absolutely worked for me. And so I've run across that a few times where it's just like, if you need that bump and it's the right situation, that kind of decoy works for me.
Right. Yeah. I'm probably going to be cautious, I think, with mine or with my deployment. I have a small one, like one that wraps up pretty tight. I can throw in a pack really easily or whatever and kind of pull it out if I need it. The only reason I'm, going to be kind of cautious is a little bit of kind of what you're talking about is like, I think the more and more, I'm trying to figure out how to say this. I'm trying to be more tuned in, like overall to things. And one of the things I've been trying to pay more attention to, like even whenever I've gone back and like looked at, footage that I filmed while I was hunting or looking at trail camera footage or whatever on video mode or whatever the case is I've started to try to like watch the body language of the deer and try to start to tell like the different mannerisms that they're displaying at different times. Right. And that's one of the things I've been trying to, work on is like, can I tell if a deer is on edge 100%, right? Because I think our first inclination is to always think they're on edge, right? Because we think that they're kind of like always on freak out mode, right? Which just isn't true. I think it depends on where you're catching them, right? It's like if you're catching them close to their bedroom or whatever, they're probably pretty relaxed, right? If you're catching them in a transition area right before they head out to like a primary food source in the evening, probably a little on edge, you know what I mean? And so I'm trying to get better at recognizing like some of those like tells that they have of like when they start to get alert, when they're relaxed, when they're going to be aggressive, whatever the case is. And so I don't know that I would deploy a decoy until maybe I had a visual and can kind of get a sense of what that specific buck kind of was, I don't want to say thinking because you can't tell what they're thinking, but like how he's reacting,
Yep.
And then if it seems like, well, he looks like he's a little bit aggressive, maybe I saw him raking a tree or whatever. It's like,
Yep.
all right, well, if I can't get him to come in, maybe a little light grunt with a decoy out all of a sudden sets him off or whatever. But if he looks timid, that might not be the right approach. You know what I mean?
Well, that's the beauty of a feeding decoy, because no deer that's on edge is also reaching down for some acorns.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And people don't want to use them. Like, we've been so sort of
trained.
Yeah. It's like every TV show you see, it's the does with the head up or the buck with the head up and, one antler or something like that. And I just from my personal experience, that was just almost always a train wreck. Mm-hmm. But the head down, the feeding posture, it's totally it's a totally different response. And I kind of discovered it by accident. And I tested it out for a couple of years on like early season does and bean fields and stuff just to see, because I could never get a good reaction out of a doe with a decoy. Mm-hmm. It was always a freaking train wreck. And then you put a feeder out there and they walk out and they're cautious. But a lot of times you'd watch them and they'd kind of look and they'd be a little boogery. And then all of a sudden they just accept it. And then it almost inevitably they'd feed closer. Mm-hmm. And it was just like, okay, like it's almost like they're like, I don't know who that is.
Right.
It's not like that's a fake. They're like, why? How did this other deer get here that I don't know who it is? Because you think about how tuned in they are to their environment. Like new deer are probably like newsworthy in the deer world, right? And they're like, I'm usually the first one here. I didn't smell anybody coming out or anything, and now all of a sudden there's a deer here. Where'd she come from?
Right.
And then they just accept it.
Right. Yeah, because I think the one thing that we don't give them enough credit for is like I think we over exaggerate their spookiness, and then or thinking that they have this lack of nerve. And then I think we also underestimate their curiosity, right? Yep. It's like, I had a buck 2 years ago, I guess, in this swamp that I was getting into the tree, and it was kind of like a shagbark tree, and I was making a little bit of noise getting in, and it heard like my clothes like brushing up against the tree, and I assumed that buck thought he heard someone raking a tree lightly. Mm-hmm. And so by the time I got set up and in my tree and I kind of like turned and looked, it's like he was standing like 20 yards away. Super calm. He was just his ears were up, but he was just kind of like, hey, what's going on over here? And he was like looking around. He didn't see a deer. Then I made a slight noise and then he looked up and saw me. And he was like, oh shit, I'm out of here. You know, but like he literally came in just out of pure curiosity. There was no other reason for him to come in to that spot,
Well, and you think that, when you're out, so when you brought up the decoy thing, I was sitting on some public land in South Dakota one time in a kind of like a rainy late October day. And I was on the ground on the edge of a public cornfield. It was a pick cornfield on this walk-in land. And I heard something coming through the cedars. And my first reaction was like, holy crap, there's bucks fighting right over there, like tick, tick, tick kind of thing, And it got closer and I was like, they're fighting they're going to be right on top of me. It was two guys walking through carrying a full body decoy, and that full body decoy was banging against all the branches. But in my head, I'm not expecting that.
Right. I'm
thinking, holy crap, there's bucks fighting here. Well, why wouldn't a deer that's out there comfortable in his place? He hears something, and in his head, he's not like, oh, that's some dude climbing a tree, into the tree.
Right.
He's expecting it to be a sound or coming from something he anticipates to be there.
Right. That in this particular little piece of public it's in between some houses and stuff like that. So that deer is definitely used to like human sounds, cars, like all that stuff, and so I'm pretty sure like he's not hearing a sound of raking in the backyard by the houses he's living near. You know what I mean? So that raking to him was like definitely like, hey, who's in my backyard? You know what I mean? So, well, man, I wanted to ask you, dude, before we get too far gone here, there's a couple things I wanted to touch on with you. One, we've been talking a lot about, public land and, it's well known that you're a big DIY travel hunter and stuff like that. And so I'm always just curious to find, and understand what kind of makes a guy tick that enjoys that type of hunting, right? Because I think some folks will say that we're a little crazy, right? Because there's a significant challenge that goes along with it. There's planning that goes along with it. It's not just walking out your back 40 or whatever, which is just, completely fine if that's what you're into. But there's a lot more that kind of goes into these types of hunts. So I'm curious, man, from your perspective, what intrigues you about the DIY public land kind of hunt lifestyle?
Dude, it's just my wiring. I mean, I always joke to my wife, I'm a pioneer, not a settler. Like I'm not I don't enjoy the same stuff over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. And I'm not knocking anybody. Like one of my best buddies, I hunt with him all the time. He would go hunt the same food plot and kill bucks the same way year to year to year. And he does. And he's super happy with that. Mm-hmm. It's just not in my wiring. And so you mentioned earlier the room to roam. I need land. I like figuring out new ground. And I just love the freedom of knowing, like, man, if you go to Nebraska and you got 5 or 6, 7 days, you go to North Dakota or down in northern Missouri or somewhere, all you got to do is just try to figure out the deer. And yeah, you're going to fail a lot, but it's so fun to start with that fresh slate and get out there and scout. And your only goal, you saw this when you were in Iowa, like your only goal, you're just hunting every day. Yep. You're just trying to figure it out day to day to day. And it's fun to get into that rhythm. And you don't have those excuses to not go. Like you're not at home going, oh, I should mow the lawn or I should go do this or that. Like this, it's just, you're just there and you're just in it. And it's a wonderful it's so, we kind of boil this down, especially in the hunting media, is like, okay, this is a means to go kill a buck. Like, no, man, this is like an amazing way to spend 5 or 6 days of your life. It's just the experience,
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you, man. Like I think that's the one thing that I've recognized probably more recently, right? That I probably couldn't put into words until probably this past year, which was I've always enjoyed going out of state and hunting, but it wasn't until this past year that I really kind of recognized that it was that I'm there to only hunt. Like that is it. You know what I mean? And like you said, I can't say it any better than it's just an amazing way to spend 5, 6, 7, 2 weeks, however much time you have, to just go kind of like immerse yourself in it, man. It's like, I think you not only learn so much about the deer and the land that you're hunting during that course of time, but I think you ultimately, not to be all hippy dippy, but I think you start to learn a lot about yourself. When you spend that much time alone with your own thoughts, just kind of thinking about things, like you really get an opportunity to put some things in perspective for yourself. Yep. And then the critters on top of it is just kind of the icing on the cake,
Yeah.
And it's just, and I think the other thing too that I appreciate is we're planning to try to take a vacation, not this summer, obviously, but hopefully next, to Iceland. That's like, our family trip or whatever. And so I immediately was like, cool, I want to hunt Iceland. Let me see where I can go hunt. My wife was like, she's like, if you want to hunt, we'll go for like 2 weeks or whatever. You can hunt for like 3-4 days, whatever, take your bow. So I started like researching, trying to figure out like, well, what can I hunt? What are the seasons, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just, you take it for granted, but there's not, at least the bit of research that I did, I may be wrong, so don't quote me on this, but like, I don't think there's public land there. And so when I was looking, like the only things I could find were all like outfitted hunts. And I think caribou was what I was looking at to try to hunt. And and it was like something like $10,000-$15,000 or something like that to go do a hunt, because like I literally just wanted to go buy an over the counter tag and like whatever province I could do it in, and then just walk around and go find some public land and go try to find a caribou, And I think that that's the other thing too that we just take for granted, is that like that just doesn't exist in most places.
Yep. Well, yeah, and you want to talk about going off on a tangent. When you start traveling the world a little bit and start seeing that, yeah, those opportunities aren't available in most places. They just aren't. I mean, there are a few places with some really cool public land, like New Zealand and a few others, but really here we're so freaking lucky, and we still it's so easy for us to bitch about the opportunities we have. And I think about this constantly, where it's such a weird phenomenon when you travel to hunt public land, and whether it's deer or pheasants or whatever you're hunting, elk. People, the locals, a lot of times will say it's not worth it. Our state's not worth it. Some of them are trying to keep you out, but some people genuinely believe. I've heard this about Nebraska like a lot, where the rifle hunters kill off all the big ones, and good luck finding a deer bigger than a 2.5-year-old on public land. And if you don't have that sort of negative bias from being a local there, and we all have it. Like I think about that in some places by my house too. But when you show up somewhere, you realize, man, there's awesome opportunities out here, and it's just not. It's not like just one place. It's all over. Almost everywhere you travel, you can find pretty decent hunting if you're willing to work, and you don't buy into that negative bias. And it's an amazing thing we have here. And I'm going to rant for just a little bit here, but one of the things that I see in this hunting space so much is it's like so easy to go negative, or so easy to like kind of shit on somebody, or be like, oh, that guy doesn't know what he's doing, or this guy's a fraud or something like that. Like we all fall into that. But really, we have the opportunity to do this stuff and make ourselves happy. Like nobody else is going to make us happy with hunting. You know, like if you're not happy because you're not killing big bucks, or, you know, your hunting isn't going the way, like it's on you most of the time. Like you have, and you have the opportunity to change this stuff. And we have so much opportunity, even if you don't have a whole lot of money, even if you don't have a lot of time, there are things you can do out there to bring the enjoyment into it in a way that you're just probably not willing to accept yet. Like, because you want to play the victim or something. And that's crazy. With the opportunities we have, it's incredible in this country.
Yeah. It's funny. It made me think of, I was out scouting a piece of public in Ohio with some buddies of mine. I think it was February, but one of the places I'm planning to hunt this year. And it's some rough country, and it's, you know, it's brutal walking. It's thick, it's nasty, it's steep, you know. And I think we did like 20 miles ish in a day and a half, or 26 miles in a day and a half, or something like that. Some kind of like ridiculous number. And we were just talking about it the one night when we were getting ready to go to bed, and it's just saying how a lot of people wouldn't, you know, put that effort in, and like, you know, it's big woods, so that it's not like you're not going to get run over with deer. You know what I mean? It's one of those types of places, but like the deer you might see could be, you know, world class type of thing.
Yep.
And, which is fine, you know, and a lot of people will complain about that, like deer numbers and not seeing deer. And, you know, the last time I hunted it, I sat 10 days and saw 3 deer in 10 days, you know? And I said to my buddy, I just turned around and looked at him and I said, dude, while everyone else is bitching, I'm winning. You know, I was like, and that's just kind of my mentality. It's like, while you're standing there complaining about what you don't have, I may lack the same stuff, but I'm going to figure out a way to make up for it, you know? And that's just kind of my mentality. Like, you know, whether it's trying to learn to hunt from the ground so I don't blow opportunities that I might otherwise have, or doing some of these travel hunts. I know we were texting back and forth. It's like, I'm tired of trying to find a place to stay that's close to where I want to hunt. So I got an old beat up trailer that my grandmother, you know, that my grandmother sold me after my grandpa passed for like $800. And it's like, and I'm outfitting it basically to be a mobile hunting rig. You know what I mean? It's like I'm putting a little insulation in it and stuff like that. So I got a place to sleep so I can just go where I want to go, and, you know, don't have to pay for hotel rooms or anything like that to stay for the however long I can keep that thing running, you know? And so it's just all about making do with what you have and being honest with yourself about what you're willing to sacrifice. Yeah. You know, because everything costs something.
Well, for sure. And, you know, I mean, that's one thing that's just kind of always chapped my ass about, you know, being in the industry. Yeah. Like I've gotten a lot of free hunts and done some crazy stuff. And, you know, I've gotten a lot of free gear, but I pay for all my own. And you know, I do all on my own. And what you realize is how cheap they really are, or they can be. You know, people are out there saying like, you know, like I can't afford to do what you do. And like, yeah, maybe not 6 states a year, but I bet you can do one. Yeah. Like I'm positive you could do one. And but you can't look at it like, well, I'm not going there because I don't know if I'll kill a big one. Like that's the wrong way to look at it. Like if you say, you know, we're going to take this trip with me and a couple of my buddies, we're going to work our butts off and camp and do whatever, and hopefully somebody gets one, you'll realize that even if you go and everybody blanks the first year, you're going to plan to go back. Oh yeah. Like, almost a guarantee, you know, and the second year somebody's going to kill, and it's going to change over time. You're going to realize like, this is totally doable financially. You can get the time, and you'll realize that even if it's hard and you're probably not going to fill your tag, which is both true, it's totally worth it. Yeah. And they're not crazy expensive. I think the first out of state, like DIY whitetail hunt I went on, I think I did the whole thing for like $600. Tag, place to stay, food. And that was probably a little on the high side. Like I probably could have cut even more corners if I really wanted to, and made it even cheaper. I did a full 2-week Montana elk hunt, and I think I spent my tag. Well, the tag was $1,000. It was a triple tag, right? Yep. But with tag and gas, everything, because I went with a couple other buddies, I think even with the tag, I think I was all in for like $1,700 for the whole trip. Yep. You know what I mean? And then, like, look, and I'm not sneezing at $1,700, you know what I mean? But people think that like doing a 2-week out west hunt has to cost just like $7,000, $8,000, $10,000, and it doesn't have to. You know what I mean? It's like you can do it with just a little bit over the cost of the tag. And I think the other thing too is when you go out and you do these hunts, man, it changes your perspective
on how you hunt when you come back home, because, you don't have all the time in the world. So you got to be efficient.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? With your scouting and what you're looking for and stuff like that. And it tunes you in a different way. Like, I credit hunting out of state for helping me become a better hunter than I do almost anything else.
Yep.
Because it's forced me to look at things differently and be open-minded, because what I'm seeing in this state isn't going to match what I see in this state. So I can't use them as as a one-to-one. I can use it as like a jumping off point, but it's not going to be a one-to-one.
Yep. Yeah. It's experience, man. I mean, just, it's so easy when you're at home to kind of buy into the stuff we've been told, whether it's weather, moon phase, or hunting pressures effects on deer, or the lull, or all that stuff. But when you go and you got nothing else to do, you go on a late September hunt or a mid-October hunt somewhere, you start seeing there's a lot of holes in the dam, man. Like, a lot of this stuff doesn't hold water. And you realize, it's just worth being out there. Like, there's a lot more deer movement going on. There's a lot less nocturnal stuff than we think. The deer are way less affected by some of these weather events than we give them credit for. And you realize, like, time in the woods, like, if you're scouting and you're planning around the right conditions and stuff, like, you can really make a lot happen when you're not supposed to. And you learn that when you're in a situation where you have nothing to lose. And you kind of get that when you go to public land. Like, I don't advocate, just blindly running across, like, you're not Zach Farrenball, right? Like,
right.
Like, not everybody can do that.
Right.
But at the same time, when you're like, well, I'm just showing up here and I'm going to hike back here, you kind of get a little more cavalier, and you're like, if I blow them out of here, I'm going home tomorrow. And what you realize is you can get away with a lot of stuff. And you mentioned this way earlier about, how cagey deer are supposed to be versus what they really are. And I'll tell you what, I think one of the reasons, like, a lot of people fall apart on big bucks is we assume, they're on top of their game. You make one mistake, they're gone. That might be true, but when you watch them walk through the woods, if they're comfortable, they own that place.
Oh, yeah.
They're not walking through like a doe with two fawns who's on edge or anything. Like, they're walking through like, I'm the king. And yeah, they bust you moving or they get a whiff of you, the game changes in a hurry. But when you watch them and they're comfortable in their element, they're not like these crazy boogery critters that, like, I have this sixth sense going on. That's total bullshit. Like, they are way more calm than people think. It's like we introduced that frenetic pace and that the whole, like, I have to get a shot in right away. And a lot of times we just introduce the thing that makes them go, wait a minute, what's going on here? Yeah. And when you get enough time around them, you just get a little better at handling that situation. You just get better shots.
Right. I think we do a good job of projecting our own neuroses on the critters that we chase in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like we are on edge so much about it that we assume everything else around us is on edge. I think my hunt in Iowa this year was a great example. I mean, there's no reason, on God's green earth that I should have had 4 different encounters with that deer and missed him twice and him still be as calm as could be. You know what I mean? Like, like, he just, to your point, like, I think you said it perfectly. Like, he was in his most comfortable spot and he was the king of the jungle in there. Right. And so it's like, it was going to take, literally getting downwind of me and seeing me at the same time, finally, for him to be like, yeah, game's over, buddy. But up until then, it's like, most people would have thought that, like, man, that deer should have been gone a long time ago. But it's like, no, like, it's the right time of year and in the right place. And I think that that's the part that people start to overlook, is like always thinking about what time of season is it? How should the deer, what is driving the deer's ultimate behavior, and how much can I get away with because of that? Right. Because I think early season, they're on bed to food. You intrude their bedroom, probably puts them a little on edge, right? You do it during rut, you intrude like a safe space for them, probably willing to forgive it a little bit more, because their drive, what is driving them biologically, has now changed, and so they're not kind of functioning in the same way. But I want to shift gears, man, and talk to you a little bit about, the state you're planning to hunt this year. And then I want to talk a little bit about the seasons and why you pick certain states. Because every time I talk to you or hear you talk or read something that you've written, especially when it's regarding whitetails, like, I always pick up like different nuggets along the way that I've not thought of before. And so I was like, this is my opportunity to ask these questions. So if you wouldn't mind, man, like, what are your plans for this year? What are you planning to do?
Man, this is a bad year to have this
I
conversation
know
because
it's tough.
there's a lot of stuff up in the air, but I think tentatively I'm going to go to North Dakota on the opener and hunt whitetails. I didn't draw my any deer tag out there. So I'm going to head to Western North Dakota and I think it's September 4th this year. So I'm going to go out and I'll hunt water, that time of year. That's all I'll have. There won't be, there'll be some stuff they're browsing on, but they won't where I'm at on public land. It'll be either water or they're just passing through. And then, I'll come home, I'll hunt Minnesota, of course. And then I think I'm going to go to Nebraska in mid-October because I want to go try to kill a big one on a scrape in Nebraska. And that probably sounds kind of weird, but I've found this spot several years ago that I've hunted during the rut a few times. And I killed the biggest buck of my life there on that property. But I've also found these monster scrapes in the woods at various times that have like 3 licking branches on them. And it made such an impression on me. And I've always had pretty good luck, like October 10th through the 20th hunting scrapes. So I'm like, I just want to go see if those big bastards are coming into those community scrapes in the cover that time of year and see if you could just kill a big one on public land on that, and it, like you said earlier, you might walk in and bump into something totally different and I'll change everything. Right. But that's kind of my plan right now is to do that. Then I'm going to come home, hunt the big woods in northern Wisconsin and try to kill one, staging kind of pre-rut type of thing. And then I think I'm going to draw Iowa this year.
Nice.
And so I'll come back and, 10 days in November, I'll go hunt Iowa and do the rut hunt thing there. That's kind of, and I don't know. I might throw in an elk hunt in there in September. I'm not sure. It just, I'm kind of, a lot of stuff's kind of up in the air right now.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about that Nebraska hunt, man. Cause like, that's one of the places I've looked at, for future hunts. What is the hunting like there? Cause I've only ever driven through it and spent 0 time there. And I literally see all cornfields, like I get a sense of like Kansas of like CRP and like some fingers of timber and stuff like that, but like a lot of CRP. So I know I'm going to have to be prepared to hunt from the ground, but when you hit Nebraska, like what's the topography? What's the elevation look like? What's the landscape look like?
It depends where you're at. I typically hunt river bottom type stuff.
Okay.
And that's the benefit when you're in these ag states, you have the benefit of the stuff that can't be farmed has a better chance of being public. Mm-hmm. And so the cover, they might, there might be a river system or a creek system. The best cover might all be public, or, there might be a good percentage of the best cover is public because they can't farm it. And so people kind of look at it and go, oh, there's huge areas of sand hills and, you got the Bessie National Forest in the middle of the state and that and go, you could hide like a sharp-tailed grouse in here. You can, of course, but there's also some really awesome timber along creeks and river systems that you can hunt that can provide a really good traditional bed to food to bed type hunt. It just depends where you're at, and there's some reservoirs with the same kind of situation. And, I would say I talk about Nebraska a lot because I love Nebraska. The secret is definitely out on Nebraska public land. Mm-hmm. Like Nebraska is one of the most non-resident friendly states out there. They're awesome. And the people are awesome. It's my favorite state.
Really?
It just is. But I see more pressure than I ever have. And so when I started hunting there was a lot of pressure then. That was probably, 8 or 9 years ago. There was a lot of pressure, but it was a lot of people hunting very easy to reach stuff.
Right.
Now you're starting to see the people who kind of, they'll get back in there and hunt it a little bit differently than, walking 200 yards off the parking area and hanging a stand. And so I feel like you kind of got to up your game a little bit. Like the easy ones aren't as easy anymore.
Right.
But it's still like just a fantastic state. And, they have a September 1 opener. And so, that's what we did last year. And it's hot as hell, but man, can be so good there.
When you're hunting some of those river bottoms and creek bottoms and stuff like that, is there any particular kind of like area that you find where you're kind of seeing aggregated sign or where you've historically or traditionally had some of your best setups or best encounters?
Man, it just depends. The one thing it's a little hard to get used to, and I don't know if this is just like anecdotal or there's more to this, but it sure seems like deer in that state and a couple of those plain states lay down a ton of sign. Like when you're walking around and you see scrapes like every 15 yards along tree lines, and I don't know if it's just because the deer are concentrated around the cover or if they actually do lay down more sign.
Right.
I don't know why it is. Like if you come from, you know, northern Michigan, or you come from PA somewhere and you hunt big woods or the Adirondacks or something like that, you would walk into a lot of these spots and go, holy crap, like I am on them. But everywhere you go looks like that. Like if you know what I mean? And so it's really easy to get lulled. So, but the thing that you kind of got to get past that is just observation, and you can see a lot in those states.
Right.
And so, you know, you can set up over that sign, but it you know, just do it in such a way so you can see a lot, and then you get clued into what they're doing now. And I've found places where, you know, there's river crossings that they'll use. I mean, they've used every year I've ever been there, any time of the season. And there's other times where I've hunted places where it's just been on fire one year for some reason and not the next. And part of that is due to some of the private ag fields and stuff that you might be, you know, your deer are either ending up at or starting at, depending on the time of day. So it just kind of depends.
Right. Man, for early season, like so it sounds like you like Nebraska for early season. Sounds like the Dakotas for early season. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, that's one way to put it.
And so when you get into like the October kind of time frame, like what are some of your favorite states to hunt during that particular period that are, you know, the DIY kind of out of state hunts?
You know, you hunt those other states early just because they're the ones that open early,
right? Or you want to go after velvet or whatever the case is.
Yeah, but I mean, there's only so many options. You know, there's only so many states you can hunt, so you almost by necessity are limited to either, you know, Kentucky or some of those western states.
Right.
But when I get into October, I switch gears completely. I like the big woods stuff. I like staging areas and, you know, scrapes in the woods. And I like getting into, you know, to me, when you're hunting around any kind of agriculture, like by the time October hits, they've been hunted enough on the field edges and stuff where that program, most of the places I hunt, it kind of just dies. Yeah. So you got to be a staging area kind of hunter anyway. And then when you get into the big wood stuff where you're not really factoring in a whole lot of ag fields because they just don't exist, then you're just like, you become that kind of elk hunter where you're like, okay, where's the freshest sign? And wherever I find it's where I'm going to set up. And I love switching gears to that and hunting in the timber.
Right. And what about late season, man? Like what are let me ask it this way. Do you ever take trips in late season specifically for late season, or are those usually kind of like Hail Marys where it's like, I've got some free time, it's late season, I got a tag for over here, let's head out?
Let me put it this way. When I go hunting in the late season, 99% of the time I have a black lab with me in a shotgun and I'm going for pheasants or grouse. And I'm like kind of joking, but kind of not. I try to fill my tags. I do like hunting late season. In all my life, I've never killed a big one in the late season. And I have had years where I tried really hard.
Right.
I do enjoy it for, you know, trying to get a doe, or if I do have a buck tag left, you know, a lot of times that'll be a Wisconsin thing, or, you know, home in Minnesota, or I might travel somewhere for it. But the late season, you know, when you're a public land hunter primarily, the late season sucks. And you could probably measure my blood pressure when I read one of these articles where, you know, somebody's like, the late season's the best time to kill a big buck. I'm like, oh my God. Like on what planet, man? Like Planet Winky? Yeah. Right. Like yeah. I get it. Like on your place, you know, or like Planet Lakoski. Sure. You guys have that spot. But if you're telling somebody like, oh, you can count on the, you know, the food sources to draw them in, or you can count on that second rut. Like, man, there's only like 9 hours of daylight in the late season, and those deer have been pounded for months. Like I'm not saying it's impossible. There are guys who are really good at it who do it,
right?
But it's not my thing. Like I've killed a lot of late season deer. I've never killed a big one, and I look forward to it very rarely.
Right.
Like, by that time of the season, I'm like, I don't want to sit in a tree anymore. Like, you know, you kind of burn yourself out, you know?
No, you totally do. Like, this is one of those years for me where it's like, I got out during late season and I mainly just started scouting during late season because, you know, it was all public. And so I was just literally trying to find where the deer might be, you know? And so it was just a lot of walking. And I was joking with a buddy of mine. We were talking last week, and I was like, I don't know how many hunts in late season this year that I went out and never even set up. Where it's like I literally walked from the time I got out of the truck and like just continued to walk, and like it got dark and I walked back to the truck. You know what I mean? It was just like, because I just didn't find anything good to set up on. Now with that, it's like I found some killer spots that I walked by that I was like, man, October, I'm going to have to walk through here and see if there's any sign laying down here, cause I've saw some historical sign or whatever. But I think you're right, man. It's like, I think if you have a great spot for late season, then you got a great spot for late season, it's, and if you don't, then it's really tough. I think the one thing too, that people overlook and don't think about is Don Higgins, great late season hunter, has some farms, Don's a killer. He kills big deer. But the one thing I learned from him is we were talking about late season specifically. And he was like, what people don't realize, he's like, everyone thinks food is king in late season. He's like, and it is to a certain degree. He was like, but people forget that the deer's biology is set up for them to survive with nothing whenever like the weather turns. He's like, so their metabolism slows, and he's owned deer for years and watched all this happen. Not just, in the wild, but like, whenever he had his deer farm or whatever. And he was like, and their bodies slow down. He's like, I can put feed out for them, and it's, maybe they'll come to eat it a little bit. If they do, they'll nibble at it and go back and lay down order, because they're trying to lay down, save calories, not move unless they have to. And he's like, the only way they get up consistently, he's like, is they have to feed every night. He's like, it's the nastiest, gnarliest, wettest, coldest, windiest weather you possibly can have is what will drive them to food. He's like, I've seen it time and time again. He's like, that is literally the only thing that will move them consistently. He's like, the whole idea of you're going to hunt bed to food in late season, he's like, unless you have the right weather that's going to make them move, he was like, it's almost not even worth going out to hunt it.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, and it totally makes sense. You think about, here in Minnesota, we get these cold snaps in December where you can go out and you'll drive by a field and you'll look and there'll be deer bedded all day long in certain places, not moving even when they could move 25 yards and probably pop some corn cobs.
Right.
But it makes sense, intuitively it makes sense that they, if they sense something big's coming that might shut them down for 3 or 4 days or make life a hell of a lot worse, they're going to get their belly full. That's interesting.
Yeah, because I never thought about it. I mean, I knew that they went into like a metabolism slowdown to a degree, right? Because I knew bucks slowed down eating, right? As the rut kind of starts to come about, right? They start to deprioritize that and they start laying down scrapes and start moving more. But even like the does and fawns, like it's the same thing. It's just how their body's wired to survive. And once I started thinking about that, I was like, man, I spent a lot of days out in late season where I didn't have a snowball's chance in hell to see anything. You know what I mean? I was like, unless I just happened to catch some like, happenstance, by luck movement. But with all your travels, man, is there any state? There's 2 questions here. What is your most underrated state that you feel just produces like not just big deer, but like great hunts, that maybe is underrated? And then 2, what are your feelings on Montana whitetail hunting?
Well, man, underrated. I would say maybe Oklahoma. As far not for showing up to kill 170 inch, have a fun season for sure, because I think everybody in that state hunts, but lots of deer, not a ton of predators, no winter overkill. They have a lot of deer down there, and the public land that I've hunted in a couple different places, aside from one spot, had a lot of deer on it. So you always, and you get a bunch of tags when you buy your license down there. So you just have this different feeling like, oh man, I can shoot 2 bucks and a bunch of does. Like, I just want to see somebody coming down the trail, and it's just fun. And both the times I've spent some serious time down there hunting, I've had really good opportunities at big non-typicals on public land. I never sealed the deal on either one. I missed one the last time that broke my heart, but it's we average killing a deer like every day or every other day with our bows down there. Nice. And that's does and little bucks and whatever, but it's just a fun place to hunt. There's some big chunks of public land, and there's some kind of cool plainsy prairie type stuff in the western part of the state, and then you get more into the hardwoods in the eastern part of the state, and it's just an enjoyable place. And you might run into like a bonus pig on public land. Nice. And so for just kind of fun, where you don't want to spend a ton of money on a tag and you want to have a lot of opportunities and enjoy yourself, it's tough to beat. It's not the place I'd go if you were like, hey, you got to gun to your head, you got to kill 150 incher. That probably wouldn't be my choice, obviously. But it's pretty fun down there.
Right. So what about Montana? How do you feel about Montana whitetails? Because it's one place that like is intriguing. So the reason I'm asking is because this year I'm doing Missouri and Ohio. right? And the Ohio trip's one that I typically always like to do. The Missouri one is actually a film project. So I have a camera guy going with, and like that's going to be filmed. But that hunt was almost going to be a Montana hunt, but I was just a little hesitant to do it only because I'm not as familiar how to get into whitetails out there, and I knew in, Missouri, very similar kind of topography and setup, at least the public I'm looking at, as to what I hunted in Iowa. So I was like, if I'm going to have someone filming this thing, I want to be somewhere where I have at least familiarity with the area and the general kind of land features and stuff like that. That way I at least hopefully see deer. What are your thoughts on Montana whitetails?
I have never hunted Montana. I've hunted where I could see Montana from North Dakota.
Nice.
I have done a ton of research there, and I think Montana would be a wonderful place to go. I think if you think, if you enjoy Ohio and Missouri, you're going to go to Montana and be like, man, these deer are easy. I think just the sheer visibility, and you're talking about river bottom type stuff. And you're talking about lower hunter densities, and it's just Western whitetails, man. Western whitetails are just easier to hunt in general than Midwestern and Eastern whitetails. They don't get the attention that our deer do. They just don't. And out in Pennsylvania, those deer get a hell of a lot more attention than the whitetails do in Montana. And so to get in on some of those creek bottoms and be able to glass some of the alfalfa fields they're probably going to, I think you'd have a wonderful time there. And I just haven't applied there yet because I have to drive by so much good whitetail stuff to get there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
same boat.
Yeah. And I'll hunt them there at some point, but it's just like, man, if you're going to Montana, whitetails are a good reason to go, but there's so many good reasons to go to that state,
Yeah, that's just it. That's the part of my struggles. Cause like, if I'm going to go out there, I'm like, I'm going to go for 2 weeks and I'm going to hunt elk. You know what I mean? Like that's, if I'm going to make that 39-hour drive, like that's what I'm going to try to kill,
Yep.
A buddy of mine recently moved out there in the past. I think he's maybe been there 2 years now. And he was on like a really good deer for out there. It was like 160 some inches. He was playing cat and mouse with on public land. And it's just, he's from New York. So when he got out there, he was like, he's like, you won't believe it. He's like, these deers are huge. He's like, and nobody talks about them,
Yep.
Cause they're almost, I think in some cases they're almost viewed as a nuisance out there. People are like, whitetails, whatever.
They're just not, when you have, the residents in that state can get tags for all kinds of stuff every year.
Yeah.
And it's just lower on the totem pole. They just have so many more options, and if you're being honest, if you live there and you could go bow hunt elk in September, are you going to go bow hunt whitetails? Like probably not.
Probably not.
You might, but it's just a different world. And they don't get hunted the same way. And, in my experience, at least with Western whitetails outside of Montana, they don't look up as much. They're not thinking somebody's trying to.
Right. Yeah. It's on my list. We'll see when I finally make it there, man. But we've been going at it for a little over an hour, man. I want to be sensitive to your time, but I have two last questions for you. One's a hunting question. The other one is more of a what I'll call a theoretical question. We'll get deep on the last one.
Sure.
So the first one is, man, I've heard you talk about, I think we maybe even talked about it when I was on your Hunt for Real podcast, is bad weather hunting, especially when you're on these travel trips, right? Because so many guys are inclined to like wake up and hear the rain, right? And they're like, oh man, it's raining, I'm going to stay in today. It's like I'm on this trip or whatever. Or maybe they've been grinding for like 5 days and it's just a good excuse to stay in or whatever the case is for a mental day or whatever. Like, what's your thoughts, especially on these travel hunts, of hunting those bad weather days?
I love them.
Yeah.
Anything that keeps people off of public land is, it's good in my opinion. The thing you're battling with all the time is just the pressure. So if there's some kind of weather event that's going to keep people at home, the hunting's going to be better.
Right.
And this is one of my sort of my beefs with the hunting industry. I got into trouble for this one time. I said this on a different podcast, but if you listen to like the Drury brothers talk about the perfect conditions to hunt, I'm not saying they're not good hunters. They obviously are, but they're like the scope that they view this through is unpressured deer. Mm-hmm. And so they're looking at, they have the luxury of saying like, we can wait for the perfect cold front with the perfect moon phase, and go right on down the line, and they can go to these deer and know that if they sit out for 2 weeks, nobody went through their
right.
Still hunting with their buddies, or nobody went through their bird hunting or whatever. Most of us don't have that luxury, and the deer on public land aren't those deer. And so they're sitting there going, the days with fewer people in the woods are the days that I'm going to move around more.
Right.
And so, you see this in the early season with the super hot weather. People think, well, if it's 90 degrees, there's going to be no deer moving. Man, that's crazy,
right.
Or it's too windy, or the rain's coming. I mean, like, man, if you've never sat a bean field in the rain, like, you're missing out.
Right.
Like, they're just, I honestly don't think deer like laying down in the rain very much. I think they like getting up and moving around. I mean, it just, there are a lot of excuses not to go. I just don't think you should use weather as one of them. And if you're primarily a public land hunter, you should take those as an opportunity to go out when other people won't be there and see what's going on out in the woods.
Right. I think a couple things there, man. I think one, the whole idea of like, if you're a public land hunter, you're probably a normal working Joe like the rest of us. If you got a day off to hunt, go hunt. You know what I mean? Like, don't wait for the perfect conditions. And maybe you don't go to your best spot if the wind's wrong or whatever the case is, or the area that you want to hunt the most, if the wind's not right or whatever the case is. Like, you can be smart about it, right? But go out and hunt, Yep. Two, I think you're right. I think we oftentimes give weather a lot more credit for. I've sat plenty of cold fronts where I didn't see anything. I've sat plenty of warm days where I saw deer. You know what I mean? And so I don't discount weather helping drive some of the decisions that they make, but I don't think that it's ironclad. It just as I think, hunting warm weather, I think, can be just as good as hunting hot weather if you're in the right spot. A lot of times you're not seeing deer on those cold weather days or warm weather days because you're just not in the right place. You have to think about how they're going to react to that weather and where are they going to go, right? Are they going to sit on a barren kind of side of a south-facing slope in the heat of the day when it's 90? Probably not. They're probably going to try to find like a low spot near water where they've got some shade and some moisture. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like that's, so you're just thinking about like, the setups all overall. But the last question I wanted to throw to you, man, this is the theoretical one. So, it's a very simple question, oftentimes complex answer, right? And I think we probably don't think about it often enough, but why does Tony Peterson hunt? Perfect reaction. That was
yeah. What I was thinking was, I've been asked that by my wife about 5 million times.
Right. I suspect the answer I get might be different than the one she gets. No, I'm just kidding.
So here's this is going to be a long-winded, convoluted answer, but when the reasons change, you know what I mean? Like when you're 8 and you carrying a BB gun around, like you want to kill sparrows. You just want to murder something, right? And then you turn like 12, you start deer hunting, and you're like, I just want to kill deer. And you go through that phase, and you're like, oh no, I want to kill a bigger one, or you start getting into these things, and like the phase I'm at in my life now, different reasons. Like I just know I have to. Like I know I'm a crabby bitch if I don't. Like it's to the point now where if I don't bow hunt for like a week and the season's over, my wife is like, please just freaking go hunting. Like go sit in a tree. Like you mentioned that earlier. Like sometimes you just need to sit out there and decompress a little bit and kind of shove away some of the life's BS. I love the meat aspect of it. Like I love that more now than I ever have in my life. And I've always loved venison. So that's a huge motivator now. I like just the challenge, like doing something of consequence. This is what I'm trying to get my kids into it in any way possible. My little girls are 8, and they turkey hunted for the first time this year. And a part of the motivation is, it's selfish, right? I want them to do what I love, but I also want them in their lives to experience something of consequence. Like we have a lot of ways to skate through life. We have it really good in this country where we don't have to do anything of real consequence, and we can get away with watching Netflix every night and going to our jobs. I'm not saying like everyday average life doesn't have consequences, but this is something different. Like you're responsible for something. You're trying to kill something. I like that part about it because it's easy to go away from that. And, the whole challenge thing. And honestly, part of it now for me is just, it's just part of my business. Like this is like, I get paid to write about this stuff. I get paid to talk about it. And it's just become, it was always a huge part of my life. Like I was always drawn to it, and now it's just so much a part of it. Like there's no divorcing me from it, like
Right.
I just have to do it. And and I don't mean that in a bad way. I want to do it,
Right.
but it is what it is. It's something that I'm always going to do.
Right. I think it's interesting, doing something with consequence. Like I think that's a powerful statement because, when you said, we have it so well here, and I was just thinking, I was like, even in the state that things are in now, we have it better than 99.9% of the world. You know what I mean? Like just for some perspective, right? It's like we literally are in like unprecedented times for our country, maybe outside of, the Great Depression, right? And maybe World War II, you know what I mean? As far as like the impact that it has on everybody, like it's touching everybody, right?
Yep.
And it's still, we have it better than anyone else.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like just let that, sink in for a second and then think about how often do we go through our day. When I think of the consequence, because I think that's a really interesting word, because when I think of that, I think of taking a life, you know what I mean? And how you have to reconcile that, because it's not something that, that hunters do just kind of willy nilly, or at least the ones that I associate myself with. I'm sure there are some, right? But I think the good ones that represent things the right way and are doing it for the right reasons, and you can do it for a host of reasons. But like, if there's not a sense of gravity, if you don't have a sense of gravity in that moment, then like, I'm not sure you're human.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And so I really like that word consequence, because I think, man, every day you should wake up and do something with consequence. It's like for me, it lets me know that I'm alive,
Well, it does. And it's like a platform. I don't know how to put this. It's like a weird platform for failure. Like you're choosing to do something you're probably going to fail at. And it might just be, like you said, you went and sat in a cold front, you didn't see a deer, or it might be you shot one in the guts and didn't find it. Like there's a spectrum there.
There is. And
I'm not saying like, gut shooting one is like motivation to go out there, but there's like weight to this, the entire process. And we really distill this down a lot of times in the hunting media, partially just because of how we have to present information, which is why I love podcasts, because you can get into this stuff.
Yeah.
But there's a lot to this. There's a lot going on there, and there's something to like human nature to need that challenge and require it, and to go through those failures and to move, to level up once in a while and then get your ass kicked and get knocked down again. And like I think there's something inherently, evolutionary or however we got it, where we just become better people because of that. And like it kind of makes me think, like it's so easy to go on social media and tear somebody down, or start a thread on Bowsite and tear somebody down or something like that, because there's no consequence to it, right? Like if you had to say that to somebody's face, there could be like a very real consequence that you're picking up your teeth with broken fingers, right? Like but it's like it's an easy thing to do, and people will do that kind of stuff. But what does that mean? Like there's like that's just a dumb little thing you're doing, like for some reason, because you're not happy with yourself, like to challenge yourself and feel better about getting somewhere with it, even if it is something as hard as bow hunting public land whitetails, which we talk about it, and you ask stories, or you'll tell a story about hunting or something, and it sounds like, oh yeah, well I went down to Iowa and screwed up a couple times, and then I killed this buck. Like, man, there's so much layered in there that's not you're not talking about, and that's the kind of stuff that's just personal, and you just have to use that to be better and use it to enrich your life. But you're not going to sell a magazine story around it, or you're not going to do a whole podcast episode on all the deer you didn't see, right? But it's all a part of it,
right? And I would say in a lot of ways, man, oftentimes it's the most important part of it. It's like, because to me, it's like, I think back on some of the hunts that I've had, and like I can think back to like specific moments and specific hunts that have had a large impact, not just on me as a hunter, but as a person. You know what I mean? It was just like how it shaped me to a degree, right? Like there were a few, we can all probably think about them in our life, like a few like watershed moments that we've had, right? And for me, there were three that I can think of that come to mind that really stick out. And one was, I think I was probably 21, 22 years old. I was in music and doing things that people in music do, which I don't condone, nor do I recommend, but it was one of those things where it's like, I was in it pretty deep, and I had to kind of come to have a moment of reconciling with myself. Right. And I wanted to get a record deal, and I wanted to tour, and I wanted to do all these things. And I remember saying to myself, and I actually told my daughter this story, where I was like, I had an honest conversation with myself in that moment where I said, you're at the age now, it was like 21, 22, where your word means something, right? Like, where people are going to remember what you say you are going to do, and then what you ultimately end up doing if those two things marry up, right? And so what I said to myself was like, you're either going to become a person who talks about doing shit, or you're going to be a person who does shit, right? And in that moment, I decided I wanted to be a person who does shit. And then I went, put a band together, got a record deal, toured, like did all the things I wanted to do. The other one was chasing this one specific deer. And it was starting to ruin hunting for me a little bit because I was stressing out over a specific deer. And I went and killed like a Pennsylvania public land basket 8-point. And it was like one of my favorite deer to kill because it retaught me how to enjoy hunting again. Right. And to remove like the outside expectation and to hunt for me. Right. And then the third one was really like this trip in Iowa because, I'm a dad. And I remember after I missed that deer twice, and I was fed up. We talked about it on your podcast. It's like there was a moment where I thought about coming home and in the middle of the hunt. And I thought to myself, kids have a funny way of doing this to you when you're a dad. I thought to myself, I was like, what advice would I give my daughter if she was up against something that was really tough that she failed at a couple times and just didn't feel like she could push through it? Like, what would my advice to her be? And I was like, my advice to her would be is like, you missed 2 deer. Good. Like, make it tougher. I want it to be harder. You know what I mean? Like, I want it to be harder that way. When I succeed, that I can look in the mirror and say, there wasn't anything that was going to keep me from being successful, And it was in that moment where I was like, dude, what am I even thinking about leaving? I was like, that's a quitter. I was like, that's a quitter's mentality. It's like, let's go get this thing done, And those were 3 like very watershed moments that, that I had in life. And two of them were hunting. And it was all based on consequences and resilience out of those consequences.
Yep. Yeah, dude, you learn a lot. I wanted to, can we just back up a second and talk about the music thing? Because that's another, I feel, I know we're going way off. No. We're driving right down in the ditch here.
Let's put her in a ditch, man.
I feel like, we talk about hunting. This is the space. This is what we're talking about. But doing just difficult things matters a lot. And, we've talked about this a little bit. I love playing guitar. Like, my little girls are playing guitar now a little bit. They're trying. Yep. And one of them really wants to. One of them kind of doesn't. So whatever. They'll go however they want with it. But that's just another thing. And, this probably sounds like cocky or like conceited or something. But when you start with an instrument like that, you are nothing but terrible for so long. And there's nothing but pain in your fingers when you're building up your calluses and you're trying to learn. And you're like, you watch somebody play a bar chord or something. You're like, I cannot get my fingers to do that. And it is such a long game process to learn how to play, even at like a low level, but play like, adequate rhythm for something, or, learn some simple songs. It's like, it is such an investment. But when you get on the other side and you get to the enjoyment side of it, where you can go, I just enjoy sitting down playing this and trying to learn new songs, you suddenly realize like what it is, like why that other part was important. And it makes the rest of it so much easier, even if you'll never be very good or you'll never master it or whatever. Like, like obviously you're not going to master it, but like you can get to a point where you just enjoy it. And I think, what you're talking about, like missing those deer and talking to your daughter about it, when you talk about deer hunting, a lot of people get into the stage where they want that validation by the big buck kill, or they want the easy bucks, but they don't understand like that shit doesn't matter. Like, nobody cares if you kill big bucks. Like, are you enjoying this or not? And if you're not, it might not be because it's too hard. It might be because you're not accepting that it's hard.
That is a good point right there, man.
It might just be you're looking at this the wrong way. Like, I want to be like the TV guys and I want to go sit over somebody else's bait pile and shoot one and move on to the next state. That's not fun. Like, I've done that before. Like, it's nice to get an easy one once in a while, but there's nothing that's going to keep you moving toward a place where you like develop the ability to enjoy it unless you go through a bunch of crappy challenges and it takes you a long time and kicks you in the butt and you finally get like to that next stage and you can go, okay, now I know that work is worth it. And even I know it's going to suck again. It's going to suck next year. It's going to suck the year after, but it's easier to accept it because you can get through it. The same thing happens with, trail running and all kinds of stuff. And, like guitar, like we talked about, that there are so many things that are worth it that are just freaking hard.
Yeah. I think, dude, when you said have to accept that it's hard, like that is like, put that on a t-shirt for deer hunters. You know what I mean? For bow hunters, like seriously, because that is it. It's like I think it's with anything that's challenging. Like once you can give yourself to it and just know that the work is required, like the work will teach you how. Like you just got to follow the work. You know what I mean? Like it's going to be there for you to do every day, and you just do the work, and you will ultimately get there. And like when you said another word, gift. Like that's the thing that like to me it's like whether it's guitar, and I'll use guitar since we were talking about that as a reference, like it's weird. Like I'll sit down now still today, and I was playing earlier today, like before we hopped on to do this podcast, and sometimes I'll be sitting with my wife, we having a glass of wine at night, and I'll sit down and start playing songs and singing. And I don't do it as actively as I used to when I was in the band on the road and stuff like that. It's like where that was all I did all day long every day. Now it's like maybe I don't pick it up for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever, and I'm just busy or whatever. And then I'll sit down and decide to play for like an evening. And I'm like, it blows my mind that I can still sit down to this day with a guitar and go, I'm going to learn that song and like look at some chords or whatever. And then like look at the lyrics or whatever, and then sit down and just be able to play and sing a song. You know what I mean? Like I can just sit down and play and sing a song. And I was like, and that is a gift. You know what I mean? I was like, now I worked for it. Right. I was like, but man, it's like every time you can do that is a gift. And every time you go and you fail on the whitetail timber and you learn something and you put it together and it gives you success somewhere else, it's like that learning opportunity was a gift. It's like recognize it for that, appreciate it. And if you'll let it, it's going to give you more than just successful deer hunts. It's going to help you as a man or a woman. You know what I mean? Yep. Just in knowing who you are and help you progress in life, man. That's like, I truly believe that. It's like, for me, hunting's very much an emotional and spiritual thing.
Dude, totally. And I think this is weird, but like, I think it is a bridge from who we are to who we want to be to some extent. Man, I think this is why so many people are drawn to elk hunting, because if you get that Colorado tag or you buy that Idaho tag or you draw that Montana tag or whatever, now you're like on the hook for something. You're accountable. And so it's like, you're going to probably start getting in a little better shape, and you're going to start thinking about this and looking at the maps and look at the aerial photography, and you're going to be shooting a little bit more. And it's just kind of like our own personal way to kick ourselves in the ass and get a little closer to the person we want to be. Like people will shit on guys like Cameron Haynes all the time. Like, man, there probably aren't that many people who wouldn't trade places with him.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and so, and he's just like, he's maybe a weird example, but I think that elk tag, and just like buying that first over the counter tag, or, drawing that first Iowa whitetail tag, or saying, me and my buddies are going here or we're there, now you're accountable. It's like, this is like maybe a bad analogy, but it's kind of the same thing. When you find out your wife's pregnant, you're like, okay, everything's different now.
Yeah.
Like I have, like, there's no walking away. Like you got to make a living. You got to do all kinds of stuff. You have to take care of it. Like, it changes the perspective forever. Yeah. And it brings you closer to the person that you actually want to be. Yeah. And I think that sometimes hunting does that for us too, even though it's like really easy to kind of be flippant about it and be like, it's no big deal, or it's just a pastime. For a lot of people it is. Mm-hmm. Like for the majority of people it is. But some people, they kind of take it for something different and use it for just so much more than a means to the end, which is a dead buck.
Yeah, no, 100%, man. And I think with that, dude, I think that's a great place to wrap it up. We got all into the feels at the end, all theoretical, getting all Socrates and Plato up in this piece. But man, before I let you go, I love having you on, dude. You got an open invite to come on this show anytime you want to. But before I let you go, let folks know where they can find out more about you, where they can hear more about, or hear more from you and read more from you.
Sure. I appreciate it, man. The podcast that you mentioned, Hunt for Real, you can find that everywhere podcasts are. Sporting Dog Talk. If you love working dogs, if you're interested in dogs with a job, hunting dogs, That one's so much fun. We talked to just amazing experts in the canine field, and trainers and breeders and all kinds of stuff. Writing a ton of stuff for Meat Eater, themeateater.com right now. North American Whitetail, Bowhunter Magazine. I have a public land column there. Bunch of stuff in Gundog Magazine, sorry. And then Wildfowl Magazine. I got a book out there if you want to look at that. Bowhunting Public Land Whitetails. All kinds of stuff. It's all over the place. You can have more of me than you'll probably ever want if you really start digging into it.
Just Google him and you'll find all that information, and then just don't look at the police record. That's all we ask. No, I'm just kidding. Well, Tony, man, I appreciate you coming on, brother. I wish you nothing but the best success this year, and I'm sure we'll be in touch before deer season kicks off.
Awesome. Thanks so much, buddy.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening, and if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a subscribe there as well. I'll be super appreciative if you do those couple things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Skull Brew Coffee Company, and Gumleaf USA Boots. And until next time, we'll see y'all.